The Battle of the Trebia was the first major battle of the Second Punic War, fought between the Carthaginian forces of Hannibal and the Roman Republic in December of 218 BC, on or around the winter solstice. It was a resounding Roman defeat with heavy losses, and yet some 10,000 and more Romans, over 2.5 legions, survived on the field and retreated in order to Placentia. In this battle, Hannibal got the better of the Romans by exercising the careful and innovative planning for which he was famous. The impetuous and short-sighted opposing general, the consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, allowed himself to be provoked into a frontal assault under physically difficult circumstances and failed to see that he was being led into a trap. The battle took place in the flat country of the province of Piacenza on the left bank of the Trebia River, a shallow, braided stream, not far south from its confluence with the Po River. The battle is named for the river. Although the precise location is not known for certain, it is generally accepted as being visible from the Via Emilia, now paralleled by Highway A21, E70 and a railroad trunk line, all of which come from Piacenza, a contemporaneously placed Roman colony, and cross the river north of where the Romans did in the battle. The area is possibly in the comune of Rottofreno at its main settlement, San Nicolo a Trebia, in the vicinity of the coordinates given at the head of this article. Prelude. Arrival of Hannibal. Hannibal began the Second Punic War in 219 BC by attacking the Roman allied city of Saguntum, just north of what is now Valencia, in Spain. After destroying the city, he marched on Italy, beginning with a force of approximately 102,000 men and a few dozen war elephants when he crossed the Ebro River in Spain, the previous border between Roman and Carthaginian interests. Trekking over the Alps, the Carthaginian force made it through the mountains with staggering losses, being reduced to 26,000 emaciated men, winning a completely unequal conflict against the Ligurians and the first legion-sized battle with the Romans at the river Ticinus. He had filled out his army with Gallic and other allies to the number of 90,000 men, 80,000 infantry and 10,000 cavalry. By the time of the Battle of Trebia, they were more than enough to be completely effective against the Romans. Moreover, by that time, Hannibal had turned all Gallia Cisalpina against the Romans, and the Carthaginians were prospering on enthusiastic Gallic supply and support. Hannibal maneuvers. The Roman Senate, appalled by the massacre of the Ligurians, had ordered the consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, who was stationed in Sicily, to reinforce the existing Roman general, Publius Cornelius Scipio. Unknown to them now, Scipio had been wounded during the Battle of Ticinus and had been driven into the hills south of Piacenza, then Placentia, a contemporary colony of the Romans. Scipio had no choice but to hold himself where he was, until he could be reinforced by Sempronius. At this time, Hannibal was camped in the plain below Scipio's camp near Placentia. The exact place where Hannibal camped is unclear, but it is thought to have been southeast of Placentia, on the Nura. According to Theodore Iro Dodge, Hannibal apparently had two objectives in mind: to accept the friendly overtures of the Gallic tribes who dwelt in the northern foothills of the Apennines, and to prevent the two consuls from coming to the aid of the other. With regards to the second objective, Dodge points out that Hannibal, astride the direct road from Ariminum, was in a centrally occupied position to potentially prevent Sempronius from joining his forces with Scipio. As a result, Dodge cites this maneuver as one of the earliest and best instances of the taking up a central position between two armies of the enemy, and comments that Hannibal's strategic understanding had presaged Napoleon's strategy of the central position, which he used against generals Johann Peter Bulli and Michelangelo Colli in the 1796 Montagnot campaign. It was like Napoleon's maneuver of 1796, and Napoleon himself recognized the fact. I was, he says, in a more favorable situation than Hannibal. The two consuls had a common interest: To cover Rome, both generals I was attacking each had diverging interests which required that Bewley cover the Milanese and Colli cover the Piedmont. There is no such crisp and masterly maneuver in early history as this, and it shows, by his own unfeigned acknowledgement, whence Napoleon drew his inspiration for some of his masterly strokes. A genius. Finding himself blocked from reinforcement, Scipio became distressed. Moreover, he was troubled by a defection among the Gauls in his own camp, who killed a number of the Roman men on guard. This defection, Scipio feared, was the signal of a more general insurrection, and he wished to keep his hold on the Ananis nearby, which was one of the few tribes in the vicinity which had remained loyal to Rome. This he thought he could do by camping in their midst, leaving a small number of troops in camp to conceal his movement. Scipio decided to move the bulk of his forces across the Trebia, wading through the chilled winter waters of the stream amid snow and rain. The Romans were discovered by a detachment of Carthaginian cavalry who sought to interrupt their march. The Romans, it is said, could scarcely lift their arms to defend themselves. Yet, while harassing the Romans, the Carthaginian cavalrymen turned aside to pillage Scipio's abandoned camp. This allowed Scipio to move his forces across the Trebia, where he took up and fortified a camp on the left bank. Arrival of Sempronius Longus after receiving the orders of the Senate at Lilybaeum in Sicily. Sempronius had dismissed his men after taking their oaths to reassemble at Ariminum south of the Po River. From there, he probably marched along the route of the future via Aemilia straight into Placentia. Sempronius had 2 legions assembled probably in early December, and Hannibal had ascertained at an early date that Sempronius was ordered to northern Italy. Being interposed between the two consuls, he could have sought a general engagement with Scipio's army before Sempronius arrived with his forces. Yet it appears that Hannibal did not wish to defeat his opponents in detail, and as shown by subsequent events, Sempronius was allowed to link up with Scipio's army. With regard to the problem of how Sempronius coming from Ariminum could have affected Livy's union with Scipio on the Trebia's left bank if Hannibal was on the right bank, Georg Niebuhr discards the Ariminum passage and conjectures that Sempronius came through Liguria. Regardless, it was not long before Tiberius and his legions arrived and marched through the city. They did not stop there, probably because Hannibal's Numidian cavalry had burned the Roman fort, but camped outside it to the south, at or near Hannibal's previous camp, some 40 days after they had left Sicily. Apparently Hannibal had crossed the Trebia in his pursuit of Scipio and was camped on its left bank. Capture of Clastidium. Despite Gallic willingness to supply Hannibal, he found that the size of his army was becoming a burden on the local communities, resulting in a daily increasing scarcity. The Romans had a grain storage depot at Clastidium, which he was planning to attack. He must have bypassed it previously on his way to Placentia. Instead of attacking, he found that he could bribe the commander, Dacius Brundisius, whose name indicates he was not Roman but was from Brundisium, with 400 gold coins. The garrison was subsequently treated with kindness, which suggests that good treatment was part of the deal, but none of the sources describe it in detail. Clastidium was located on the right bank of the Po upstream from the Trebia. That Hannibal could operate there without hindrance indicates that he was in fact camped on the left bank of the Trebia, and subsequent operations against the Gauls prove it further. Dissent among the Gauls for reasons unstated by either author. The Carthaginians suspected treachery from the Gauls located between the Trebia and the Po, that is, on the left bank of the Trebia, where his subsequent activity shows that Hannibal was certainly located. The authors make it clear that the Gauls hoped to stay on the good side of both commanders, but they do not give the details. Hannibal was incensed enough to dispatch 5,000 infantry and 1,000 cavalry to devastate their country, district by district, and this action decided whose side they were to take. They appealed to the Romans. Tiberius sent an unspecified number of cavalry across the river with 1,000 infantry. They caught the Carthaginians pillaging there and drove them into Hannibal's camp. The Carthaginians acquired reinforcements and sallied out to push the Romans back across the river, where the Romans sent for reinforcements from their camp. Hannibal stopped the Carthaginian attack because this was not the time and place of his choosing, but was happening spontaneously. Tiberius, however, concluded he had won a victory with the very arm in which Scipio had been beaten, the cavalry. Hannibal now knew that he could provoke Tiberius and made plans to entice him across the river, where his troops could be slaughtered without assistance from the camp. The consuls confer the cavalry action of the preceding day had inspired the Romans with confidence. Sempronius resolved to seek a decisive battle as soon as possible. The Senate had sent him to assist Scipio, but the latter was unable to be assisted, leaving Sempronius in an ambiguous situation. According to Polybius, Sempronius felt free to act on his own. He was, it is true, at liberty to act as he thought best owing to the illness of Scipio. Nevertheless, he felt obliged to argue it out with his colleague in heated language. What good is there in further delay and waste of time? Where is the third consul and the third army we are waiting for? It is from their native soil, from the land in which they were born, that the Romans are to be driven. He accuses the Romans of cowering within their camp in the heart of Italy. Livy is unable to say, however, where this harangue took place, whether sitting by his ailing comrade, or in the headquarters. There is no mention at all of the camp at Ripa Alta, or how Scipio would have gotten to the camp near Placentia, or whether Sempronius had any authority to command Scipio's men. Wherever this consultation of consuls took place, Scipio advised that their legions would be all the better for a winter's drilling, and that the notoriously fickle Celts would not remain loyal to the Carthaginians. He advised Sempronius to let matters remain as they were. Sempronius decided to ignore Scipio and go ahead with the attack. The texts do not say that he kept Scipio informed. Numbers. Romans. When Scipio left Massilia, he had no or minimal forces. In northern Italy, he superseded Lucius Manlius, acquiring his 2 legions plus 10,000 allied infantry and 1,000 cavalry, and Gaius Atilius, reacquiring the legion that had been taken from him by the Senate plus 5,000 allies. Since Livy is using 4,000 infantry and 300 cavalry as the standard complement of the legion, Scipio should have had 12,000 Roman infantry and 900 Roman cavalry plus at most 13,700 allied infantry and 1,000 cavalry. After losses suffered at Ticinus, Scipio should have had at most 27,000 men. Sempronius had been given 2 legions, 8,000 infantry and 600 cavalry, but he also had several thousand allies, about 16,000 infantry and 1,800 cavalry. Scipio had the greater army and would have been senior in command if active. Neither consul, however, could supersede the other without a decree from the Senate. Livy states the actual number of Roman troops before the battle to have been 18,000 men, to which were added 20,000 Italic allies. Polybius sets the number at 16,000 and 20,000 allies, this being the strength of their complete army for decisive operations. When the consuls chanced to be united, he does not say that they were united, only that, if they were, these would be their numbers, that is, 4 Roman legions and 4 allied alli. Both authors subsequently tack on 4,000 cavalry, evidently not part of the 36,000 or 38,000, from which it may be inferred that the latter were infantry. The numbers stated to have fought the battle are problematic. A combined Roman army should have had 5 legions of 20,000 men and all 30,000 allies authorized by the Senate, and yet, if the armies were not combined, Sempronius should have had only 2 legions of 8,000 men. One answer is that Scipio gave up 2 legions and kept 1 and 20,000 auxiliaries in his own camp as a reserve. Livy seems to think that Scipio's wound gave the entire authority to Sempronius. But immediately after the battle Scipio commanded an army marching from his camp to Placentia. If Scipio could command after the battle, then he was not so incapacitated as to be removed from command before it. Both authors agreed that the two consuls had sharp differences of opinion and that Sempronius acted on his own. It is possible that the authors doubled the number of Roman legions fighting the battle and that Sempronius had only 8,000 or 9,000 Roman infantry. The authors both relate, however, that a mass of 10,000 men broke out of the Carthaginian encirclement and fell back on Placentia. Tiberius apparently did have more than 2 legions. Scipio argues in the story that Sempronius' men needed the winter to train, suggesting that on the way to North Italy Sempronius may have raised 2 more legions of recruits, throwing them into battle under difficult physical circumstances against expert advice without training. There is no mention of any such events, however. Yet another hypothesis for reconciling the numbers cited by Livy for combined strength of the two consular armies and the actual number of participants in the Battle of the Trebia would be that Sempronius detached part of his allied contingents for garrison duty on Sicily and for naval service with Marcus Aemilius and Sextus Pomponius. Some allowance should also be made for non-combat losses. The strength of this hypothesis lies in the maximum use of ancient evidence. The 10,000 veteran troops who did not break and run were the major survivors. The authors make it clear that not many of the others made it to Piacenza, but some did. The others were massacred, as was Hannibal's custom. They appear to have been the mysterious extra legions, perhaps recruits, the cavalry and the auxiliaries. The casualties therefore were a maximum of 32,000 men, a rate of 76%. The rate was not at maximum, but the number who escaped is not known. If it was half the number who fell back in good order, the rate would have been 64%, in either case, a Roman disaster, but perhaps not quite the one depicted by the authors if Scipio's army was not involved. The Carthaginians did not cross the river to take Sempronius to camp. They might have been physically exhausted or concerned about the 10,000, or they could have been deterred by the army in the second camp on their flank. Carthaginians. Although Hannibal departed Spain with 50,000 infantry and 9,000 cavalry, his long march to Italy had clearly cost his army dearly. He had, however, been largely able to make up for his losses with new recruits from among the Cisalpine Gauls. Both sources agree that he fought the battle with 40,000 men, 20,000 Celtic, Spanish and African heavy-armed infantry, 10,000 cavalry plus another 1,000 in ambush, 8,000 Balearic slingers and spearmen plus another 1,000 in ambush. While the casualties were not stated, the square of 10,000 Roman infantry that broke the Carthaginian center caused a great slaughter of African and Celtic troops.